High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
Wanted to chat this morning to Professor Bill Kolbrener about the amount of anti-Semitism on campuses and that students are facing. There's a report that found that 96% of Jewish students experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism. I believe that this is, I'm assuming that this report is in Canada. I don't know, Canada used to be like the place of people who apologized. They were always so nice. I don't know what's gone wrong there. Professor Bill Kolbrener, good morning. Hope you're well.
Good morning, Howard.
So is this particularly a response to what is a survey in terms of Canada, or is this North America as well, the rest of North America?
So the survey, Howard, is about the experience of Canadian students. And as you point out, 96% of them said they had experienced some form of anti-Semitism. I've been in conversations about whether you can say racism is systemic in America. It does seem right now that anti-Semitism is systemic in Canada, and I'm not so sure the extent to which America is so different. This is really just a flag. And I would just add the 96% number, seeing anti-Semitism, being exposed to anti-Semitism, two other very important numbers. 18% of students experienced anti-Semitism from their professors. 7% experienced it from their TAs,
wow,
their teaching assistants. So this no longer then is just a cultural problem of the university. This becomes a systemic problem within the university, where the humanities, our beloved humanities, Howard, and this is why it's so painful in some ways, the humanities have become a vessel for anti-Semitism. The humanities have been repurposed. They no longer function in the way they did for us. And I know I have siblings in America who wanted the same college experience for their kids that they had. That's no longer possible. The humanities serve an ideological function. As I said, they are now redirected, repurposed for a political agenda that finds its clearest expression and the greatest form of agreement in anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism is the thing that just holds it all
It's
together.
the glue. What a wonderful unifying notion. But is there a sense that this is has been a deliberate strategy, or is this just something that occurred as a result of something before it, and this is where it led? In other words, is there design, or did this just happen?
You know, Howard, you and I have spoken privately, wondering how is it that the mayor of New York, Mamdani, we read all of the crazy things that he does and the way he's using his political platform as a way of fomenting anti-Semitism. And we wonder how is it that he is one of the most popular politicians, not only in New York, but in America. So there is a design. The BDS movement, which is just the anti-Israel, the anti-Jewish, the anti-Semitic movement, run out of Qatar and, government, this stuff, NGO Monitor. You see where all the hatred is coming. And it has an author. It's a split author. Again, the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar. And by the time it gets to college campuses, nobody knows where it's from. And it's kids on college campus saying, from the river to the sea, and you ask them, well, what sea, what river? I don't know. It's just part of the water that they're drinking on campus.
Does it reach a point, and I always wonder about that, because students by their very nature push back against something. And I'm wondering if this becomes, at some point, it hits a level that it becomes almost counter-revolutionary, where you start to see this return. Is there any sense that this is likely to happen, or are we simply going to see, in the case of Canada, Jewish students saying, well, unfortunately, we can't go to Canadian universities?
Well, I think that's part of the question. And in a way, Howard, you're like Radio Free Europe. I mean, you're broadcasting across a world which is saturated by anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. So what do we say? We give up the university. And perhaps that's part of what we're doing. That's what I started to do at Writing on the Wall after October 7th. We were prescient. We said, well, people, Jews need a place to publish. And it turns out we need a place to be published because we're being censored. And also because the places where we usually converse, where we usually publish, are now contaminated. The student in a Canadian university documented the Hamas atrocities on October 7th. And her instructor told her, you should be talking about Israeli policies of genocide and the way rape is incorporated within that genocidal policy. It really has become a kind of pravda. And I think, Howard, I don't know the American scene as well as I used to. And perhaps there will be a backlash against this crazy woke stupidity. But on the other hand, there's no centers, there's no in the middle where there is no anti-Semitism. I think that's one of the things we discovered from the Trump administration when the vice president really hung Bibi out to dry. And said, a country of 9 million people can't solve all their problems through genocide by killing people. So it's not like we're looking at friends on the right either. I think we have to remember that, Howard. There's no safe space for Jews anymore.
No, as you were saying it, I just sent myself a note because it occurred to me that to some extent, whereas in the 1930s or 40s Europe and prior, Jews were physically placed in ghettos, to some extent what's happening now has resulted in the ghettoification, if such a word exists, you'll tell me, of Jews in other spaces. The writing on the wall, which is an important publication because it gives Jews a space, the moving to maybe Jewish universities or schools and places like that. To some extent, aren't we being placed and doing so because going quite happily, well, not happily, but willingly, because it gives us our own space, but aren't we being placed in different types of ghettos?
I think, Howard, that's a very sober way of looking at things. I think the spaces that we create for ourselves.
Oh, the line is not a great one. I'm not sure if it's on your side or ours. Sorry, can you just can you hear us clearly?
It's just. I was just saying that Howard, Chai FM is another example of a ghetto in the airwaves. Are you? Yeah, and I think we have to not look at this place as a ghetto, but as a place where we can empower ourselves, Howard, because people are telling our stories for us, and we cannot let them do that. So however we consider these spaces, and I think we have to think of them as dynamic spaces where we create for ourselves. Yes, we want the rest of the world to hear us. Yes, it's important that Israeli novelists get published so others can read them. We need to read them. We need to create this culture, Howard. I think also the university will fail in the humanities because of AI. Everything is changing. And the question is, to what extent can we ourselves create spaces where we can let each other know we are here. We are in pain, but we are creating, we're working, we're building our community. We're building a space where you can go into a classroom and not have to worry about, does the professor hate me?
Yeah, and do I need to be hiding my identity if I want to achieve anything in this, or just change the way I present things, because I am very, very concerned about the either social backlash or academic one, and one that it might have on my academic career. It's a massive problem. Do we know if there's an acceptance by the Canadians, just going back to that specific issue? We've seen restaurants being burned down in Montreal. We've seen what is happening across Canada. This really should come as no surprise to anybody that the universities are a hotbed of hatred. The question is where they go to from here. Are they as willing, or are they willing, the Canadians, to fight for academic freedom on their campuses?
Well, I think 70% of the students said that their administrations show no real acknowledgement that it exists. And again, we can talk about the strangeness that any other form of racism or bigotry at this hysterical level would be noted on administrative levels, and there would be important initiatives to combat it. But with the Jews, somehow it's different, Howard. It's the long history, and when we look at it from the context of the early part of the 20th century, the first half of it, it doesn't seem so different. We're just back in this long duration of Jewish history, and I think, Howard, we have to get used to, again, we are persecuted. We have to protect ourselves.
That too, very, very sobering. So what would you advise? I mean, if a student came to you and they were considering going to a university in Canada, for example, or certain parts of the United States where we know we've got these issues exist, what would your advice to them be?
I would advise them to come to Israel. That's what I would advise them to study here. It's a terrible thing to say. I don't think the answer is, in like you're saying, we're becoming self-inflicted ghettos again, but maybe that's what's necessary. Would you send your child to, you have this great liberal arts education, Howard, Shakespeare, Milton, the way your mind opened. I still see this with my students sometimes. I say to my students, you had an aha moment. It is that gift, and we think we're going to be able to say, go to the university and get that. And in fact, what you get is the exact opposite. Instead of the ability to think and ask questions. And we were doing that, and I think we were responsive to what we perceived as a more right-wing world. And we were kind of on the center or even on the left asking questions. But now it's the people on the left who are not asking questions. They're like Leninists. They have their own doctrines. And the university is becoming a Leninist stronghold. I don't see it changing. Yeah,
so I mean, if you asked me in terms of the South African context, I would say you definitely keep away from UCT, because there is a significant problem there in terms of anti-Semitism and bias. But Wits University, the University of Johannesburg, is incredible and hasn't seen these types of issues. And the university's fought very hard from an administration level to make sure that, yes, there might be, of course, there can be protests, and that's every person and every student's right, and different opinions, as there should be. But it remains respectful, and I think that I think parents have a greater responsibility today than they've ever had before.
I think I would love to know about other universities who are so proactive in their fight against anti-Semitism. It sounds like this Wits is an unusual university.
It's incredible. Their Vice Chancellor, Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, has been tremendous in achieving this balance. Obviously, there's no perfection in anywhere, but it's been a very, very clear approach of his to make sure that all students of all race, all religion find a home for academic pursuits at the university. And I think that it is tremendous. Mukund is telling me we need to wrap this up. He's actually giving me all sorts of warnings now. We're on our third warning. So Professor Bill Kolbrener, that is where I do need to leave it. And of course, we will continue these conversations.